Hello, everyone. Just want to jump in and thanks everyone for joining us a bit early. You're clearly followers of the Tom Coughlin, the ex-coach of the New York Giants, what he used to say. But we are going to start at around 5:45 as promised. We've seen more people joining, so we'll just go quiet for a bit and then come back in a few. Hello, everyone. Just want to jump in and okay. Think we can get started. So welcome everyone. Chris, do you want to get us going?
Yes, I would, Shai. Hello and welcome everyone to Tools Over Rules, How to Be on Social Media Without Feeling Sad. I'm Chris Perry, Executive Director of Children and Screens, Institute of Digital Media and Child Development. Children and Screens is an independent nonprofit working to both understand and address digital media's impact on child development and help children lead healthy digital lives. I'm excited to be here today joining Fort Health and these outstanding panelists to discuss in more detail what can we all do to support youth so they can be better equipped for healthy online engagement. This is the one piece of advice we hear from experts more and more as we continue to explore the relationship between social media and youth mental health. Communication and guidance are key to developing a healthy relationship with digital media and devices. The truth is, this is complicated. Yes, there is research that shows a relationship between social media use and harm to youth mental health, particularly excessive use, exposure to harmful content or manipulative designs, and maladaptive behaviors. However, there's also research that shows benefits, particularly through connection, exploration, and creative expression. We hear this combination of strengths and weaknesses echoed when we talk to youth directly, which leads us to explore exactly who is at risk and when and to what extent are those variables likely to cause those individual differences. That doesn't mean we shouldn't all take this issue seriously. Data from the CDC and recent health advisories from the United States Surgeon General and the American Psychological Association are clear. Youth are struggling with mental health issues, and there are ways that our current social media landscape is exacerbating this. We are now seeing more legislative attempts to create a safer online environment, with new regulations and lawsuits developing almost every day. But this process takes time. So what it means is that we need to help youth and their families better understand the skills and strategies and tools that they can depend on to guide safe and healthy interactions online. Through this, we can equip them to examine their own uses and impacts and determine steps they need to achieve better outcomes. We should all be working with young people to understand their desires, goals, and challenges with social media and not rely solely on restrictions and controls. By helping youth reflect and assess how social media is affecting them, we can help them have better experiences now and be prepared to maintain healthy habits in the future. I know that's what we're all here for today. So let's jump in. Shai,
Awesome.
introduce the panelists.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Shai. I'm one of the founders of Fort Health. We're a mental health practice providing care for children and families in New York and New Jersey. And we provide education sessions like this one for families all over the world. And each month we bring in different clinical leaders and different organizations to discuss a topic that affects the mental health and well-being of our kids and our families. And our goal is to always provide you with skills and actionable advice based on clinical experience and scientific advice. And this idea, this principle of providing skills is especially pertinent to today's topic. As Chris mentioned, this topic is very relevant, but it's also very, very nuanced. And our natural instinct is to restrict the amount of time, the types of content that kids engage with. Look, this is not the first time that we've done these sessions about social media. It's actually the third time. But tonight the focus is different, right? Tonight the focus is not necessarily on restrictions and rules. It's about skills and tools. And we have, I think, the perfect panel for this. We have, she literally runs the lab on this topic. Dr. Sophia Trukas-Bradley is a licensed clinical psychologist, the director of the Teen and Youth Adult Lab. One of the lab's key research areas is the impact of social media use on adolescent mental health. Dr. Matthew Beal is the chair of child psychiatry at MedStar, Georgetown University Hospital. He's a chief medical officer at Fort Health and works with us, and we're lucky to have him. And of course, Chris Perry here. We are also working, she has some technical difficulties, but we are working on having her join in. Emma Lemke, who's the founder of Logoff, which is a youth movement dedicated to empowering youth to tackle the complexity of social media and its impact on their privacy, safety, and mental health. She started the movement while in high school, one of the nation's leading advocates and experts on this topic. And I can see that Emma is here. Hello, Emma.
Shai, I just have to say it makes me feel better that the young person is the one having technical difficulties. It just it doesn't always happen that way.
Yes, indeed. Emma, you are co-host now, so your video should be working. There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Thank you.
Solved it. Usually, so this is the ninth time we've been doing these. Usually Matt is the one with technical difficulties. Today he sent me a message 20 minutes ago saying, I got it figured out. So Emma, welcome. We introduced the topic, we introduced the session, we introduced you. The format is roundtable. You're not going to see people grandstanding. You're not going to see any slides. You're going to see an open discussion based on questions and topics. So, Matt, why don't we start with you? Fundamentals and briefly, what is the evidence suggesting the potential connection between social media and mental health challenges, especially among teen girls?
Thanks, Shai. Thanks for the introduction. Great to be with you all. Emma, welcome. Really excited to learn from you in particular. And Chris, thanks for helping pull this together. So Shai, I'll be brief because unfortunately we've heard a lot about the fact that there's an extraordinary crisis happening in young people with regard to mental health. And there's a very strong correlational trend that seems to exist between the introduction of social media tools about a dozen years ago, the increased time that young people spend there, and worsening teen mental health. And when I say correlational, what that word means is that these things are happening at the same time. They seem to be associated with one another, but there's not a lot of direct evidence saying this causes that. There's reasons to think that they're related. And there's more and more evidence about that, both that it causes good things, and as Chris was saying, and also that potentially can cause a lot of bad things. But the level of science right now is that we see these things as correlated or related, but the correlations and relations are really strong, and they're really rather convincing. There are effects on emotional health, like sadness and loneliness, anxiety, negative self-image, body dissatisfaction, negative social comparison. I think we'll be talking about that a lot. Exposure to bullying and harassment, exposure to just the sort of highly inflammatory and intentionally distressing content that's on so much of social media. I think it's important to keep in mind of how much of social media is distressing on purpose. It's meant to be that way because that seems to draw us in. There's also effect of social media on general health, particularly reduced sleep for young people and reduced physical activity. And we think that in many ways, girls may be particularly susceptible for a variety of reasons. Which platforms girls tend to use more of. There may be increased proneness to social comparison among girls. There are certainly specific social pressures on young women in our society, but these are generalizations. Generalizations are not necessarily true or not true for any individual person, but generally these are trends that we're seeing. So Shai, there's a sort of way to get us started. Why don't I stop there?
Okay, very good. I want to add a bit more nuance. And by the way, I'm going to call you all by your first names. It's just easier for me, okay? Sophia, what are the aggravating or mitigating factors that can help explain why social media affects some people more than it affects others?
Thanks, Shai, for leading us, and Chris for the introductions, and to all of you for being here tonight. Well, I want to echo and amplify a lot of what Matthew already said. So there are many things to keep in mind about the nuances of how social media affects teen mental health or anyone's mental health. As we heard about, there's some evidence that girls are more affected, both positively and negatively, actually, by social media experiences. At the core, though, beyond any identity-related mitigating factors, and I will give some other examples in a moment, the question is, what are people actually doing online? So asking, is social media good or bad for mental health, is overly simplistic. It's as simplistic as asking, are peer relationships bad or good for teen mental health? That is an almost meaningless question in its simplicity, because some peer relationships can be extremely important in promoting positive mental health. For example, if friends are providing social support, and especially if kids are having difficulties at home, peers can provide life-changing, life-saving social support. On the other hand, many peer relationships can promote risk for mental health concerns or risky behaviors. And the same thing is true online. So social media, it comprises a broad range of different types of behaviors and exposure to different types of content, as Matthew was describing. And the question is, are teens using social media in ways that provide them with health promotive or risky content and experiences. In terms of more specific risk and mitigating factors, when folks are engaging in social comparison online or seeking out hateful content or explicitly risky content, those are two of the risk factors that are best supported by research for promoting negative outcomes. But in terms of identity, a really interesting thing is I mentioned that for girls, there's evidence that girls are more susceptible both to the positive and negative aspects of social media. And the same is true for LGBTQ plus teens. So there was recently some research done by Common Sense Media, which focused specifically on girls and found that LGBTQ plus girls were more likely to report both positive experiences online and negative experiences online. And then briefly, before I pause for now, I just want to say that there are some key personality factors that can predict differences in susceptibility. So for example, adolescents who have a general tendency to view things negatively, adolescents who have a tendency to socially compare both on and offline, and those who have a tendency to engage in ruminative thinking. These are all examples of personality or psychological factors that can change people's susceptibility. So I'll pause for now and we'll keep going in more nuance in a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. You mentioned experiences. So Emma, I want to go to you. And so Sophia literally runs the lab. You literally started the movement. Can you share a little bit about the personal experiences that led you to start Log Off? What drove you to do it?
Absolutely. And thank you again for including me in the conversation. I'm super excited to be here. A great break during finals. So I started the movement and kind of started to engage in rethinking my own digital experience at the age of 12. I was the last in my friend group to get social media, specifically starting with Instagram. And then from there, making my way up through the ranks in high school through Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, and the like. And what I found through that usage was that all of my friends' attention was turned from looking at each other and engaging down to their screens. We were disconnected from one another. I individually felt as though as a young girl, I was being fed harmful dieting videos that then led to more and more content about diets and workouts that then promoted an eating disorder. And then I am someone who's predisposed with OCD and anxiety to ruminations. And I found that I fell into incredibly deep depressive and anxious spirals because of the quantification of my worth through likes and comments and followers online. And all of that really built up until I hit a personal breaking point in the 9th grade after spending probably 5 to 6 hours a day scrolling. I remember that there was the buzz of a notification. I reached to grab my phone and kind of put between that buzz and the Pavlovian response, I finally asked myself, why am I spending all my time on social media when I don't benefit, when I'm harmed? What pulls me in and what keeps me there? And how do I actually benefit from these platforms? And that led to years of, minimal research in high school, wanting to do something, wanting to have conversations with people. And then eventually it led in the summer of 2020 when everyone was kind of locked down and it was my senior year to launch the Log Off movement. Initially just my way of wanting to create a space for young people who I felt were absent in the research that I found, wanting to create a space for them to feel as though they were, active agents of change in our digital ecosystem rather than just passive victims of big tech. So I wanted to get in that critical perspective and created the community. And, the first applicant for our Teen Leadership Council was from, the Philippines. So I quickly realized that my story was, not one in isolation. It was not one confined to a geographic region, gender, race, ethnicity. It was one felt by a lot of other digital natives.
Thank you. I want to turn now into the topic or the theme, really, which is about, emphasizing skills that we can teach instead of restriction that we can place. So Sophia, I want to go back to you. Can you discuss perhaps how time restrictions alone maybe would overlook more nuanced aspects that influence teen social media experience?
Absolutely. I feel we've lost a lot of valuable time. So by we, I mean researchers, psychologists, and practitioners, and the general public arguing about screen time. I mean, we're all on screens right now. We're technically engaging in social media use because we're using digital technologies to have interpersonal experiences as we speak, all of us. And this question of how much time do we spend engaging with social media, as I mentioned before, it's connected to this idea that asking, is social media good or bad, or asking how much time we're spending on it is really quite meaningless. The question is, what are we actually doing with that time? And Tristan Harris was a former Google engineer who started the Center for Humane Technology, which is a great site to check out for everybody listening right now. And he introduced the idea of time well spent. What would it mean for all of us to be using our time online in ways that are aligned with our values, and that actually promote positive mental health and well-being, rather than taking us away from things we care about? So it is definitely possible to spend too much time online. But most teens, the issue is not the total hours alone. It's, are they using social media in some specific ways that are problematic? So first of all, is social media displacing other activities? The big one is sleep. If kids are using social media at night and it's interfering with sleep, that's a huge issue. Is time on social media displacing time that could be spent in real life, in-person, face-to-face interactions? That's a problem, because during the adolescent years, it's a really important time for developing core social skills. So those are examples of displacement. We've mentioned social comparison and exposure to hateful or problematic content. Emma was talking about the problem of really extreme dieting and pro-eating disorder videos. So there's so much nuance here. And a little bit later, I'll get into some actual concrete strategies that parents and teens can use to address these concerns.
Emma, I want to turn to you as the resident young person here on this call, because we're all ancient. We know that some states have gone as far as banning or state sanctioned restrictions. Can you talk a little bit about how time restrictions impacted your peer groups, social media use, and overall well-being?
Absolutely. And I really do appreciate the framing of, it's more about how you're spending your time, not, the actual time itself. Because the other hat that I wear, I am the founder of Log Off, but I also work with Design It For Us, which is a youth-led coalition pushing to protect kids and teens online. So I engage a lot and am kind of in the know as it regards, or as it pertains to state action to protect kids via legislative action. One of those actions has been to limit time on screens. It's been to really attempt to put in more design features that notify you when you've spent, an hour on your screen. It's been to give parents parental consent. You have to get parental consent before your kid can get social media. And I think it falls under the same category, where these are just blunt instruments that don't root out the real issue. It's attacking just basic time, when a lot of the people in my age group echo the same sentiment. We'll get into phone calls, we'll get into meetings, and we'll all say, we'll set limits for an hour and we bypass it. We all will be in a group together, and I see it all the time on college campuses. The buzz that pops up, your screen goes blank and it says you might want to spend a little more time. And it's the easiest thing in the world to bypass and to keep going with passive usage. So whenever I engage in conversations with teens who are very upset about their screen time usage, I always say to them, reflect on why you're using. Let's look at active versus passive screen time usage, and always lean towards engaging and setting limits for yourself when it regards to passive time rather than active. So if you find yourself, obviously, a lot of people in my age group that I'm around, we engage in a lot of passive time when we are needing to study and when we were needing to sleep. So taking, action steps to mitigate that passive usage while allowing yourself free access, honestly, to the active usage when you're connecting with people, reaping the benefits of the online world. It's a much easier frame rather than just being judgmental and saying to yourself and beating yourself up for the screen time usage that you're engaging with.
Amazing. I actually want to stay with you for a quick follow-up question. What measures are teens self-imposing on themselves to promote that more healthy use?
I've seen a range of things. So oftentimes what I have done with people in my group, and what we've kind of engaged with as a whole, is going and adding applications. So like the Center for Humane Technology provides a very robust list of ways that you can increase your active usage while mitigating your passive usage. So a lot of the things that I have seen have, ranged from downloading applications like the Stanford Habit Tracker to, buffer your screen when you're trying to get on Twitter during a period that you should be studying. One easy way to limit your passive screen time usage. Then it's supplemented with ways to uplift your active usage. So do a mindful practice and ask yourself, each month as a reflection, why am I using social media? Each time you go on, to increase your tech intentionality. Am I going on to follow people that I care about? I know a lot of people who do follow cleanses where they'll go and just unfollow accounts that they don't think benefit them to train their algorithm to give more content that they feel as though reflects what they want to see online. It's just small micro features and steps like that can kind of ensure the rebalancing of better active usage of social media rather than its passive usage. But I will say, it is very representative of my generation that a diverse array of, tactics are taken because we're very innovative, we're very scrappy, and I've kind of seen it all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome.
Shai, can I ask Emma a follow-up question?
Yes.
So we're take advantage of an expert here. Those were beautiful examples, Emma. What among my patients, the young people I work with, in addition to the things that you mentioned, one thing that seems to sometimes be helpful, and it's particularly helpful when it comes from them and not from me or certainly from their parents, is doing brief detoxes from specific platforms. So doing 2 weeks off of Instagram. And from my perspective, that has two benefits. One is that if it actually is having a toxic effect on their mental health, they get a relief. And the second is it seems to give them an opportunity to do what you described in your own journey, which was sort of cluing in to what is my actual reaction to the time that I'm spending online. What is the impact it's having on my mental state, my well-being, day by day, week by week, and doing a sort of a 1 week or a 2 week detox from a particular platform gives us this very empirical opportunity to say, well, do I feel different? Am I sleeping better? Am I less stressed? Am I spending more time with my friends? Like what's happening?
Yeah, 100%. I think I love that you said that it's an empirical approach. I co-sponsored with Log Off micro retreat for individuals to take a step back, to kind of have weekly reflections. I think when people hear detox and retreat, they get scared. They're like, I don't want to completely detach. I have work. I have to study. But oftentimes, the best retreats and, meditative, mindful practices that Log Off provides is by saying you can craft this around your own experience and your own, your time. So what we really suggest and what we've seen has been helpful with a lot of young people is saying, I'm going to take a detox, but it's going to be all afternoon. Like I delete Instagram at the end of the day and I don't use it during final season and I'll come back after. Or it's more conditional and based off of the individual who's partaking. But to your point, almost everyone, and I can say everyone with confidence that I've talked to that's done a detox has had positive benefits. They have been more mindful. They have felt like they have gained something, even if that is just better information regarding their own usage. So I always say to people, you don't have to engage in a detox, but it is a very helpful, mindful practice and one that is becoming trendy on TikTok and other platforms, which is ironic, but it is. So that's kind of where we're at. So I've seen an increase over the past few weeks.
Matt, I want to go to you and sort of surf on what you just said. If time restrictions are a blunt instrument, and if your patients don't listen to you, I can promise you they listen even less to their parents, right? That is a truism. That's always been. So what can parents do to promote that more healthy use, to not just use and pivot to the blunt instrument of time restrictions? What practical advice can you give them?
I think I'll start or I'll caveat it, Shai, by picking up on what Sophia and Emma both said, which is that this is highly individual. So there are not sort of prescriptions or sort of rules of thumb for everyone to go by. And, particularly kids who are in the middle of a crisis or in a series of crises, there may be sort of places for their parents to be more active and to insert themselves more to help kids navigate a crisis. And when a crisis has passed, or fortunately, if a kid is not in a crisis, I think parents can have a different approach. And of course, this is different by ages too, with a 9-year-old versus a 14-year-old versus a 17-year-old. Very, very different approaches. I think in general, I think it's important for parents to take in some of what the panel's already shared, that I think this is really news to parents. I think in many ways, and I have 2 teenagers at home. So there's part of me is sort of not a digital native that's just wanting all this to be over and just like waiting for it to pass. And when do we get to the other side of it? And I think what is helpful about what Emma is sharing is that we're not getting to the other side of this. Like this is it. This is what the world that our kids are going to live in. And so helping kids to live in it healthfully is what we have to be about. So I think parents have to get curious about it, have to recognize the difference between different kinds of use. Like people have been saying, active versus passive. Not all platforms are the same. Being on Instagram is not like playing Fortnite. These are different, like really, really different activities for kids and have different effects on their well-being. And each kid is different. And so, recognize all those individual differences around platforms and kinds of use. Get your kids' input. Do they think everything's perfect with their use? Or are they recognizing that they're overusing it sometimes, or overusing in certain emotional circumstances, or overusing certain platforms? Do they feel worse around using some activities online than they do under others? Do kids have that awareness that there's some differences here? Trying to elicit that in conversation with your kids in a curious, open-minded way is really, really helpful. And then also just recognizing that kids are better at this than we are. When we try to unilaterally impose restrictions, different kinds of limitations, they're going to get around it. They're going to figure out their way around. They're going to be more savvy than we are. Which is not to say there's no place for parents to put restrictions in. I think that it's not the place where we get the most benefit for our kids and for our families as well, and for the ways we interact. Because when it becomes a police state at home around access to the internet and to digital tools, that's not a good state for anybody. I don't think it doesn't feel good to us as parents, and it doesn't work particularly well.
Yeah. So to build on that, I'm going to ask Sophia, based on your research, if we can't restrict, what can we teach them to do? Are there any exercises, skills, things to build self-esteem, resilience, things that parents can teach and show their kids that can mitigate some of the emotional risks of social media?
Absolutely. And before I give them, I just want to emphasize a point that we've been talking about a bit, but I want to make sure is really central and clear to folks listening. The difficulties that teens have managing their time online and avoiding getting sucked into problematic content and losing a lot of time online. Those challenges are by design. And this is something I know, Emma, your work really focuses on this. So social media and digital technologies are designed to capture our attention. Social media companies make money by hooking us and by making products that it's hard for us to turn away from. And the reason I'm bringing this up in response to your question, Shai, is that I do think it's really important for any conversation between parents and kids to involve an acknowledgement that both parents and kids are up against a giant system that's aimed at making money by keeping us online. And so there are things we can do as individuals that teens can do, that parents can do to help teens, and frankly, to help themselves, because adults struggle with these things as well. And it's a systemic problem. That said, the overall goal that I want to promote, given that, as Matthew and Emma were saying, social media is not going anywhere. It's not realistic to say, the goal is to just wait for social media to go away, or to say one's kid will never use social media again. That can actually involve social risk, because during adolescence, it's really important for kids to be able to connect with their peers on a regular basis. So the goal is intentional use. The goal is reducing mindless use, avoiding problematic content, and using social media in ways that align with values. And I do love the idea of the brief detoxes. There have been some recent experimental studies where researchers have randomly assigned some kids to go without social media for certain amounts of time, and other kids to use it as normal. And the evidence does indicate that there are positive effects for anxiety, depressive symptoms, and body image. And so to the extent that it's possible to take a brief detox altogether from social media for a few days or a few weeks, that's amazing. But for some folks, the more realistic option is to take a brief detox from a specific app, or to take the app off of one's phone temporarily. So for example, I'm not on any social media except social media that's connected to my job. And I do have a problem getting sucked into what's called academic Twitter, which is like nerdy Twitter for professors. And I had to take it off of my phone. I can still go like in my Chrome computer browser to check when I really need to know something, but I am not losing time getting sucked in on my phone. And many adolescents, when they remove an app from their phone, find that they learn a lot about how addicted to that phone app they were. They'll report finding their thumb kind of mindlessly gravitating toward where the app used to be. So it can be a really educational experience as well as a helpful one for mental health. So brief detox is great. Anything you can do, as Emma was saying, to make it harder to check your apps, using the advice given on the Center for Humane Technology list of resources, excellent. And then I've had the privilege of working recently with folks at the new Center for Digital Thriving at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, led by Emily Weinstein and Carrie James. And parents might recognize their names because they wrote a recent, very popular, outstanding book that I highly recommend called Behind Their Screens, What Kids Are Facing and Adults Are Missing. Highly recommend it for its practical advice and its centering of youth voice. And they started this Center for Digital Thriving, and they and those of us at the University of Pittsburgh, as well as Common Sense Media, are collaborating together to use evidence-based principles from clinical psychology, specifically from cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy, which parents may or may not recognize some of those names. And we're developing resources, some of which are now freely available. If you Google Center for Digital Thriving, you'll find access to those resources, and they can be used by kids and by adults working with kids. And examples of resources are exercises aimed at helping kids understand what are cognitive distortions, otherwise known as thinking errors. All of us are susceptible to them, especially when we're online. So for example, selective attention to negative content is an example of a cognitive distortion, and there are ways of challenging that. Another example of evidence-based resources and strategies is figuring out what are my core values and how can I use tech to support those values instead of using it in ways that take me further away from my values. And there are concrete exercises available for free at the Center for Digital Thriving website. I'll pause there.
Wonderful, thank you. And we will post, so I'm seeing a lot of questions about links. We're going to send a recording out. The recording is going to be on a webpage. That webpage will have a list of these resources. So all good there. The title of the book was really interesting. I want to turn once again to Emma. Emma, what do you think more parents and adults are missing or misunderstanding about how to support their kids and teens' digital well-being?
What a loaded question, but definitely one that is incredibly pertinent. Because I do think that the note that Matthew had mentioned earlier is incredibly important to emphasize, that the genie is out of the bottle. Sadly, we are in a state that I wish I could go back in time and not have to deal with social media. It would make social life so much easier. But that's not a reality that can never be obtained, and nor should it, because I think that there are tremendous connective and exploratory and expressive benefits of the online world. But what's important is entering these kind of relationships and entering this connection with social media can be primed with conversation and sprinkled throughout by conversation with your parents. I think that parents need to actively engage in assisting their young person navigating, but not only assisting, understanding and being curious about the young person's experience as they move through the digital world. I always say that the best resource out there is called Dear Parents from the Screen Time Action Network. It's a digital well-being resource from teens for parents. I know the two teens that made it. It's outstanding. And the whole purpose of the document is to kind of, talk about how to have these conversations. And fundamentally, what they say is listen with care, respond with love. Listening with care is curiosity, an open mind, respect, and empathy. Responding with love is lots of questions, optimism, validation, and engagement. Because these conversations can be incredibly difficult because there is a generational divide, and there are a lot of things that I think young people can't explain. It's very hard to explain what it's like to live and to grow up caring about social media at such a young age. But by listening with care and engaging with love, those conversations I found and have heard from parents they're much more open, they're much more conducive, and it creates an environment where the young person understands that the parent is there to support them, not just, confine them. The other thing I'd say is a lot of parents, and my parents included, and I've called them out for it, will set rules and boundaries and they won't follow it themselves. So I always say, young people mimic their parents. I mimic my parents. Sadly, I'm realizing that in college. I'm the daughter of a lawyer and I'm in pre-law. So it's like, if we mimic our parents, you're going to mimic the same practices. So specifically, if you're going to set boundaries, like no phones at the dinner table or no phones in the living room, things like that, to create phone-free spaces for your well-being, no phones in the bedroom, things like that. You'll want to mimic that so that your young person realizes that it is not just something that is for them, it's for the entire family. So I'd say that those are kind of my two largest, pieces of advice for parents, but understanding that, it's really difficult and it's hard. And I know that those conversations seem really overwhelming, but your young people are navigating too. And I think the important thing is that they know that you're there and that you care.
Amazing. That's incredible advice. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. I think we're going to move to the next section. So as I think Matt answered someone in the Q&A, the gold standard of evidence is to have, right, an experiment with a control group. We don't have that yet. Social media, Sophia's going to tell us, I think, soon that we will. But the point is, whether there's a strong correlation or causation, the reality is 1 out of 5 kids struggles with mental health. So I think I want to spend a few minutes on trying to get you experts to help the parents and people on this webinar understand when is it time and how to get it. So Matt, I'll start with you. Can you provide some guidance on the signs that would suggest that a teen social media use might be contributing to depression, and when it might be time for professional intervention? What are the signs?
Yeah, I think that the signs are no different than the signs that we've talked about for a long time of when people in a young person's life should be concerned. If someone is withdrawing socially, if someone is not spending time on the interests or activities that they used to love and that they used to really be devoted to, if someone is demonstrating obvious sadness or irritability or anger or changes in the way that they're interacting with the people that they care about in their life, those are all signs that someone is struggling emotionally. And whether or not social media use is the cause is sort of irrelevant and kind of impossible to untangle too. It's probably a part of the picture, and there are probably other factors as well. And so I think we could be having this part of the conversation in any context, but I think the right advice, I think, for parents and the adults in kids' lives is, if you feel any inkling of concern, express it, ask, check in with the kids in your life. How are you doing? What's going on? Are you okay? How's your stress level? Can I be helpful in any way? I've noticed this and this. I've noticed that you're not spending as much time playing drums or hanging out with Michael. Why is that? I'm just curious. I want to make sure things are okay, and expect to be met with a stiff arm by your kids when you ask those questions. That doesn't mean it was the wrong question or the wrong time to ask. It means that that's the reaction that kids have when they feel approached by parents that they're working very hard to distance themselves from. To remember that teenagers and young adults, their job is to establish independence from the people that have cared for them for their whole lives. And that's hard work. It is really hard work, and it is grueling. And it means when they come and try to help, there's a lot that teenagers do that is sort of like, stay away from me, keep coming. Stay away from me, keep coming. And you have to be sensitive to both if you're the adult in a teenager's life. You have to be able to sort of keep coming and keep expressing concern, and let teenagers know, hey, it's okay if you're having a hard time. I'm here to help, and I'm also here to get you, real help, professional help, outside help if that's what you need to. And that conversation may need to happen 5 or 10 or 15 times for a kid who's really struggling before you get a reaction that's sort of like, yeah, actually I am struggling, or that would be great, or I would like to go talk to somebody. Stay after it. It's hard work as a parent or as an adult in someone's life, but it's worth it. Stick with it, and trust your instincts as a parent. If you're worried about your kid, there's probably something to be worried about.
Yeah. Let's take the scenario where you had the conversation, maybe the first, second, third, fifth time, and your kid said, "Yes, I'm ready for help." Sophia, what's the next step here? When parents reach out to a clinician and they think that there's, there are worrying signs, and they think maybe social media has something to do with it, what are the critical questions they should be asking?
First of all, I have this energy saving light situation. So that's why suddenly my screen goes dark and then you see me waving frantically. So sorry about that. So I have some advice for parents about questions to ask when you're looking for a therapist, and then questions more specifically about social media and depression. So it's really important to make sure the therapist is licensed. There are many different types of licenses, such as licensed psychologist, licensed psychiatrist, licensed social worker, counselor, but you need to make sure the person is licensed and ask them what treatments they provide, and look for someone who is trained in evidence-based treatments. It is totally fine to work with somebody who says they use a mix of different treatments, but it's important to be working with a clinician who is keeping up to date with the research literature. And that's true for any parent searching for a therapist for any problem their adolescent kid is having. But it's especially important for social media use when that's the concern, because the research literature is changing really rapidly. So therapists need to be keeping up to date with what we know about standards of care and best practice. There are some red flags to look for. I'm taking this from a website that I'll send to you, Shai, as part of the resources that go out to parents with the recording. So this is from a website called effectivechildtherapy.org, and it's a great resource for parents. It's from the Society of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology. So if a therapist is overpromising, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And it's also a red flag if the person hasn't had any training focused on social media. So that's where we get into the specifics. So things to ask a therapist right away are, have you worked with adolescents who are experiencing the things my kid is experiencing? And what treatments have you used? And what have the outcomes been? And they can't tell you any identifiable information about other clients. If they do, that's an enormous red flag and you shouldn't work with them, but they should be able to tell you generally what their practices are. And then once a parent is working with a therapist, or rather the kid is working with a therapist, it's important to note that there are differences across states in the amount of information that parents are able to get from a therapist versus whether the child is legally protected and able to keep all information confidential. And I can go into more detail about that if people have specific questions, but I'm aware I've already been talking for a little while.
Well, good. Thank you. Oftentimes, it might be the young person who's ready to receive help, and maybe the parents are not having that conversation yet with them. So, now from a young person's perspective, what advice would you give to teens about how to initiate a conversation with their parents about seeking help? Oh, you're on mute, I think.
I think it glitched a little bit. Would you mind repeating the question on my end?
Oh, no worries. I'm saying, as a young person, from your perspective, what advice would you give to other young people about how to initiate a conversation with their parents? Basically, how to ask for help with mental health.
Okay, thank you. It's a really difficult attempt. It's really hard to figure out like where to start. And I always say start with personal experience and storytelling. From my perspective, when I first engaged with my parents, after the fact, I did not do this and I wish I had. I started off by saying, this is why I go on social media. This is, how I engage. This is why I love it. I love going on to see videos with my sister. I go on social media because it brings me joy when I see a funny video. I feel like I'm getting information from this account. I think it's really important to prime and to kind of allow your parent to understand, why you enter in the first place. Because oftentimes I think parents see the negative effects and say, why would you ever go on as a young person? And then I think what I usually say to a young person is follow it up with your fears, your worries, and your frustrations. What am I afraid of online? I don't really know how to navigate this situation. I feel like I'm spending too much time. I would love accountability here. For each young person, I always say go in with a game plan, go in with a mindful approach, and just open up the floor for conversation. So it's kind of ironic. I feel like the Dear Parents Guide it kind of pertains to both young people and their parents, going in and understanding and listening with care and responding with love, because I do think that parents are just really worried and afraid and scared, and young people should be more aware of that, and also more acutely accepting of, trying to explain their perspective, trying to, open up the door to create a generational divide to have these conversations. But storytelling and empathy really is the first place to start.
Thank you. A lot of questions about resources here. Chris, you guys probably have some of the most comprehensive resources. Can you talk a little bit more about Children and Screens and the resources you guys have to support families?
Yes, in fact, so many good resources have already been shared. I'm thrilled to hear about everything Matt and Emma and Sophia have shared. And in addition to that, we have a brand new website that we designed to be more evidence-based, more easily navigated, and sort of structured around these compelling questions that are being raised here as we speak. Like, when should I buy my first smartphone, or how much time should my child spend on a device each day? So that the site itself allows everyone to learn and explore the research itself through a searchable database that has specific tips and resources associated with the topics that we think are most popular right now. And they're also organized by specific age groups or developmental stages, so that the site becomes very tailored to you as a parent or a teen, depending on what your question is, what stage you're in, or what information you're really seeking. We also have more than 65 Ask the Experts webinars. We're doing one here with you tonight, which is really fun. But these are also made up of interdisciplinary experts who are tackling some of the most pressing questions and issues surrounding digital media today. In fact, both Emma and Sophia have been featured on our webinars, have done a terrific job, and we follow those up with tip sheets for parents that include scholarly news and articles and other translational materials that take the research and move it into more practical, actionable steps for parents. And then finally, I would just say there are other resources on the site at childrenandscreens.org that we really welcome everybody to take a look at, bookmark as one of the resources.
Yeah, I think it's such a tremendous amount of resources, and all of them we have found to be incredibly practical, which is often what is missing. We're going to start doing some Q&A, and here it's essentially it's a first come first serve. I'm going to put the question out there, and whoever feels compelled to answer, go for it. A question or a theme, really. Is it about only social media, or does it mean just being online or video games? Someone asked about the metaverse. We sometimes use screen time and social media interchangeably. Is there a level of nuance there?
We probably all could contribute here. So I'll be super brief. But yes, the what you're doing online matters quite a bit. We heard earlier about the difference between active and passive, between engagement that's social and interactive, going back and forth with friends by text or on a platform that's messaging, as opposed to something that's passively consuming content. I think it's also particularly on sites that are sites like Instagram and also TikTok, the longer people spend on the site, the more extreme the content that they view. So time spent matters a lot too. The first 5 or 10 minutes that you're on Instagram, you're seeing the same content that most of your friends are seeing. And when you're on Instagram for 40 or 60 or 80 or 100 minutes, you're starting to see more and more extreme content. And again, consuming that passively. Playing video games that are social, multiplayer, role player games where people are talking while they're playing and connecting, oftentimes playing with friends who are IRL friends or just online friends. Those are very different experiences. And I think those of us who know young people well, we see the difference. If you hang out with a 15-year-old after they've been on Instagram for an hour, and this for me, this is, my kids at home are not on Instagram for an hour, but some of my patients are, or with kids who've been up for an hour playing an interactive video game, are doing a creative endeavor online with friends, all on FaceTime together, writing a song together, and you interact with the child afterwards, it tells you what the impact of that media experience is for the child. An hour on Instagram, people come out of that grumpy, moody, discouraged, withdrawn. After an hour making music on FaceTime or playing a video game with 10 friends, they come out charged up, wanting to share their experience. I just won the game, or we did this amazing thing. And they're eager to share it in other shows, including face-to-face social encounters. It's a totally different thing. So it's really important that we distinguish between these different kinds of ways of being online. Sophia, and Emma, I'm sure you have things to add as well.
Yeah, I'm just
So
gonna
to add, Emma, go ahead.
I was gonna echo everything that you said. It is very different. I will say, being around young people and even seeing the differences between platforms is kind of shocking. Seeing people emerge out of like TikTok and people emerge out of Instagram, Snapchat. I think something that's really important to hone in on and emphasize is, platforms are, they are created in different ways to engage with young people and to engage with users, but they are distinct and there are specific like media ideologies and cultures of engagement with each one. So I have seen very different engagement, very different levels of anger and frustration and boredom on TikTok versus Instagram versus Snapchat. So sometimes one is worse than the other for a young person. But the effects that you find can be very different even between platforms.
I'm gonna move on. There's again, it's a question, but it's a theme. Was last asked here also. I'm hearing from some kids and other teens say that if they're not on social media, they feel like they're behind. They feel like they're missing out. So what is some practical advice to how to tackle what seems like peer pressure?
So during adolescence, it's completely developmentally normative, completely normal for adolescents to be highly influenced by their peers and to want to be doing what their peers are doing. That's actually a core feature of this period of life from roughly 10 to 18. And it's my opinion that if an adolescent is at an age where the majority of their peers are using social media, it might not necessarily be developmentally best for the kid to not be allowed to be on social media at all, because peer relationships are so important. So I do see the Q&As from parents where many parents feel that for their kid in particular, being online is more harmful than helpful, and you have to make that decision as a parent. But I do want to just emphasize that it can be developmentally problematic if a kid has no access to their peers in the ways that their peers are all interacting with one another. So the fear of missing out is not something that it's not just a line that kids use to get to be online. It's a real developmental need. With that said, I also want to amplify what Emma was saying before about the importance of these active and validating conversations between parents and teens. And it's really important to note that a lot of what she was sharing is supported by many decades of research that precede the era of social media, just around the benefits of parents learning to have conversations with their kids that are more collaborative than adversarial. So when kids share their feelings, even if you as a parent are concerned about what they're saying, you can always start by validating how they're feeling. So for example, if a kid says, I'm really anxious because you're not letting me go online and I'm missing out, you can validate you feel anxious about this, even if you disagree with the rest of what they're saying. And the book that I mentioned before, Behind Their Screens, which I've seen some parents chatting about in the Q&A, that goes into a lot of detail about the value of relationships between parents and teens that foster this idea of collaborating and active listening. And as Emma mentioned, parents also fall trapped to these different by design social media traps. Parents, for example, may set limits with their kids' social media use that they themselves are not living by. And it can be very powerful for parents to say, I understand this pull, I feel it too. Here's what we can do together.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Chris, you've done again a tremendous amount of resources and webinars and articles. Is there any resource or tips you can recommend when it comes to bullying on social media?
Yeah, actually, we have a webinar on that topic on our website, and it also I was going to add on a little bit to what Sophia was saying about how it's typically it's a normal developmental stage. It's a really predictable need that adolescents have. Completely validate that. In fact, one thing we've heard can be really effective is sort of a joint detox with friends, where you're sort of engaging your broader peer network in that activity so you don't feel so alone. There's also this sort of thinking of it differently, and sort of the joy of missing out, sort of a reframe on FOMO, sort of JOMO, and thinking about how you might think about what the good things are that could happen if you're not, the fearing missing out. So I just wanted to add that to the last conversation. But a couple more things on cyberbullying. We've talked about how important those open channels of communication are. Matt talked about it. Sophia, Emma, everybody's talked about. I cannot emphasize enough how critical communication is in establishing any of the sort of supports or guidance that parents want to help their kids with. So, and when it comes to bullying, the only way that you're going to know that that's happening and that you're going to be invited in to help with the problem is if you've established a pattern of being calm and understanding and frankly aware of what the risks are, and that you're ready to move with those. And I will also emphasize other things people have said about technoference, or essentially parental use of devices, so much so that they're not only modeling this, but they're actually not paying as much attention to the relationship with the teen or with the child as they might if they were off their phone more. So in a way, it's interfering with that dyadic relationship that might allow the child to feel safer and more willing to discuss something like cyberbullying.
Right. That's excellent. So we are approaching the time. So I guess, I wanted to thank all of you for joining, especially you, Emma. I wanted to thank Chris and the good folks at Children and Screens for the opportunity and the expertise. Sophia, Dr. Beal, thank you as always. And just to say, plenty more resources. We will send, for everyone who asks about a recording, we will send a recording. There's also going to be a list of resources there, but the main resource I can recommend to everyone in this topic is indeed Children and Screens. And if you are in New Jersey or New York and you do need more help, Matt's clinical team is here for you, and all details on our website as well. Thank you again. Happy holidays if we don't speak to you before, and have a good evening.